Hello, you guessed it. Polygonal walls have something mystical about them. All it takes is for us to drop an eye onto one cyclopean wonder and see them projecting into the future. Naturally, we are not the first people to realize that much. Thus, since ancient times with the classic Greeks and Romans, there were plenty of people struck by the wall's timelessness. In fact, those classic observers placed so much faith in the unknowable past of cyclopean masonry that, more often than not, they would have some oracles, named Sybils, future guessing around cyclopean walls. Now that we've reached the future and the predictions are no longer valid, it is worthwhile making a trip back into the past of future guessing. But beware, I predict this can become very confusing. In classical times, and I quote, a frenzied woman that would mumble prophetic words was called a Sybil. Since no one ever talked about talking to a Sybil, everything about them was just hearsay, from the unclear past to the uncertain future predictions, including the name, Sybil, that might have been just a confusion, with Sybil, with this later one, Sybil, naming a Pyrgian goddess that had a thing with cats. And cat ladies are usually frenzied, so it fits. To make all things worse, the country of Phrygia was known only via improbable myths, like that one of King Midas turning to gold everything it touched. Up to 10 cat ladies, or Sybils, have said to have existed into the deep past, although sources are so mixed up that we might end up with just 4 or 5, provided that, with the benefit of hindsight, we try and be systematic, like this. We will next investigate all the rumors about past Sybils and try to confirm if there are cyclopean walls around them. Let's see what we can find. The most famous of the past future guessing frenzied cat ladies is not a Sybil, she is a Pythia, acting in the sanctuary of Delphi in Greece. The two main differences are 1. The Pythia worked for the god Apollo, and the Sybil would work for Zeus, that's a whole god generation older, meaning a lot of time in between. The second major difference is that the Pythia was alive and babbling when some sources wrote about her, whilst the real Sybils are much older. Sybils existed pre-writing, and every source for them was recorded in the past tense. The curious thing is that the sanctuary of Delphi is said to have a proper Sybil, hundreds of years before the famous Pythia, and the Apollo temple. Coincidence or not, the magnificent polygonal wall at Delphi is also older than the temple on top. So, now that we know, it could all make sense. In the past, I made a video about Delphi and the beautiful wall, so please check for a link on the comments. For now, suffice to say that in Delphi there was both a Sybil and polygonal masonry, both being much older than the temple and the Pythia. In the site of Dodona, in northern Greece, there is no polygonal masonry left, but that's because the whole complex was destroyed and rebuilt more than once. It happened when King Pyrrhus, probably suffering from ADHD, remade the city right before his costly victories over the Romans. And it had happened even before, with some earlier Greeks destroying and rebuilding whatever was in Dodona. Still, sources are clear in saying Dodona was a super ancient sanctuary, with a Sybil, dedicated to Zeus, a very special Zeus named the Pelasgian one, and Pelasgians are the name given to the original builders of cyclopean masonry. So, case closed. Okay. The Greeks had this nasty habit of looking into a foreign god and giving it a Greek name. So the god of Dodona, whoever he was, became a Zeus, which was not just an insult, it also meant old, Likewise, the Greeks called Pelasgian to any of the older native populations they smashed, especially those building cyclopean walls. Thus, if Dodona had a Sybil mumbling for the Pelasgian Zeus, it is not a stretch to assume she might had some polygonal walls around her. Erythrae in northern Turkey nowadays had a famous Sybil and also features some awesome polygonal masonry. Check, done, next. Okay, let's elaborate a bit more with some curiosities. Erythrae had not one but two Sybils, one more recent that had an encounter with Alexander the Great and another older one, with links into Babylonia or some undefined location on the east. This older Sybil is reputed for predicting the war of Troy and also warning that Homer would be forging a soap opera out of the whole sad affair. To compensate for that over-precise prediction, rather un-Sybil-like, the origin stories for the Sybil of Erythrae are as incoherent as they possibly can, including her being the same Sybil as the one called Samian, Trojan, Persian or Pyrgian, all upcoming next I predict. As per the walls, they are nice, polygonal, and they are older than any other building in town. But the views from that site are so amazing people forget to film the cyclopean walls, and all I have left are some lame pictures. So far so good, but it ends here. From now on, the sources are even more confusing than the Sybils' prophecies, and those ancient scholars no less frenzied than cat ladies. Still, many say there was a Samian Sybil, originating from the Greek island of Samos. This cat lady would be mumbling from the Samian temple of Hera, the goddess wife of Zeus, so it all checks. Nevertheless, in other sources, this Samian Sybil is to be found elsewhere, across the sea, or just confused with many other probable Sybils in places like Erythraea, Libya, or Troy. Yeah, I predicted those too. The most we can make of all those sources is that the Sybil in Samos is very likely, at least in part-time, commuting to and from other sanctuaries. Plus, on top of that, we can also say that Samos had polygonal masonry. Up in a hill, above the old city of Samos, there are some fancy ruined walls, protecting the city. The walls of Samos were built by some local tyrant in around 500 BC, and, as expected from that time, they are not quite cyclopean. However, those same walls are built on top of some older and completely cyclopean masonry, of which is hard to find more than a random photo. But it's enough to settle the score with Samos had both a Sybil and polygonal walls. Cassandra was the told-you-so queen, or princess to be precise. On top of being the daughter of the king of Troy, she was doomed to see the future clearly, whilst no one believed in her sayings. Well, that's a very non-Sybil of a thing, because a proper Sybil just frenzies and still people believe in her. To add insult to injury, Cassandra is said to have been future guessing from the city of Dardania, thus being named not only Trojan but also Hellespontine, or the Dardania Sybil. This case must be sorted by the polygonal walls in Dardania, because there aren't any, for the simple reason that there is no city of Dardania also. Dardania is sort of a mythical place, so no city, no walls, no Sybil, done. Wait, not so fast. Dardania, Troy. Before Dardania being Troy, we have first to answer if Troy was in fact Troy. The city ruins in northwest Turkey, now said to be the location of Troy, are to me a very unconvincing find. That place does not have cyclopean walls, and for that I won't trust it was what people keep saying it is. Alexander the Great was sort of a collector of prophecies, having won more of those bets with destiny than proper battles. One such big bet, placed with a bookie in the Siwa oasis west of the Nile, said Alexander was the godly ruler of Egypt, eventually benefiting his Ptolemy friend. Now, in retrospect, this all looks suspicious, and a propaganda coup. For the Egyptians, the prophecy was made by a priest of Ammon, whilst for the Greeks the story was twisted to include a Sybil and the god renamed Zeus Ammon. Since there is no polygonal masonry in the Siwa oasis, I'd say no to the Libyan Sybil. Well, there are some really weird and bent stone near the pyramids. Those can be called polygonal for sure, but it's a world away from the oracle at Siwa, both in time and place. So, no, I don't think the Libyan Sybil stands for the test. Phrygia is a bizarre case of history. All we know about that place are mythical tales, like Midas that turned everything into gold, or Gordio that had a knot, and also that the Pyrgians used smurf hats. Academics say the Pyrgians were some brutes living in Turkey, too late for all the myths to make any sense. So we should wisely ignore them being both the academics and the myths. So far, it's all a blur for the Pyrgian Sybil, and it can get worse. Just remember that the original cat lady, Sybil, was a Persian goddess. To further add to the confusion, Pyrgian fortune tellers could have been turning tricks for a god named Sabazios, called by the Greeks, you guessed it, Zeus, and also giving some hints to Alexander the Great. That guy again. But now from an Apollonian non-cyclopean temple in Didyma, southern Turkey, or from Telmessos, another set place in southern Turkey without cyclopean walls. So, are you confused yet? You'd better be, unless someone from the future comes in and clears that out. Okay, let's take a breather here to settle some ideas. Here's what we know so far. 1. Real Sybils are old cat ladies working for gods named Zeus, back in the Bronze Age, whilst younger oracles or Apollo's babes are from a newer generation in the Iron Age. 2. The same can be said for polygonal masonry, that is old, at least from the Bronze Age, and there is no second wave of it, because iron makes building with square blocks much easier. 3. My guess is that Phrygia names two cultures, one more recent, that is a real culture of people in Anatolia, and another one much older and mostly mythical, with the gold touching Midas and Sybils and Smurfs stuff. Academics don't agree with the previous points, so I feel confident about them. Now, let's evaluate this case. If there are no Pyrgian cyclopean walls, and also that old Phrygia is but a myth, then I think the Pyrgian Sybil is not worth the predictions. Cumaen was a Greek colony near Naples, in Italy, with some caves carved into the soft volcanic ash rock, including at least 2 caves where a Sybil could have lived. This later Sybil, sometimes called Cymenian because of another 2 caves where she would wander, is blamed for giving away some books to the Etruscan king of Rome. promising the coming of a future savior. Originally, this prediction would have been written to flatter Augustus, the emperor of Rome. But in the Renaissance, the tale was further adapted to mean the future coming of Christ. The polygonal walls are a tougher case. Although there are plenty of polygonal walls all around and not very far from Naples, there is none in Naples nor in the Greek colonies under the Vesuvius. So, I'd say Cumaen is not like the others, it's a new thing. In the Renaissance, the Italian supremacy lobby wanted a Sybil that could be less Greek than all the others, especially the one from Cumaen. So they come up with the Tiburtine Sybil, future guessing from the garden city of Tivoli, a village where the Emperor Hadrian and the failed Pope Dest wasted fortunes on artists. As a payback for all that spending, Renaissance storytellers made up a tale to affect Augustus, having the emperor asking the Etruscan Sybil if he would become a god, with the cat lady answering back that the true god was to be Christ and not Octavian. Well, the way we know this story is a full fantasy is that Augustus got his name by actually becoming a god, and that in Roman religion, being a god was way easier than talking back to the emperor. Also, the city of Tivoli was Etruscan, and for being Etruscan it means there wasn't any type of fine masonry in there. The Etruscans were terrible builders, making temples out of wood and mud, far from Cyclops. Thus, the Tiburtine Sybil is an even later invention than the Cumaen one was. Now that we've covered the whole list of Sybils, we get to see the common ground in between all these oracles, their cities and the polygonal masonry. Let's go. 1. All the predictions are revealed after expiration. No one was really commenting on something that happened within their lifetime. The Sybils are always older than the sources for them. Quoting a Sybil is equivalent to saying only brutish people in the past would believe in them. 2. The locations and the number of Sybils are all but fixed. Sybils could be digital nomads or just being misnamed or nicknamed. It is pointless to make sense of those lists. 3. There are 2 generations of frenzied fortune tellers. One younger, still active in the Iron Age, usually pimped by Apollo. And another one older, from the Bronze Age and closer to Zeus. 4. Many of the cities with Sybils don't even exist. But on the other hand, where their location is more certain, we tend to have a strong correlation with polygonal masonry. 5. Polygonal masonry is old, pre-indo-european, even if academics prefer to ignore all the evidence in stone and focus on their pottery fetish. By now, we've seen sufficient signs that cyclopean means at least Bronze Age, or earlier. 6. On the other hand, for what it's worth, there is an academic agreement that the Sybils are also pre-Indo-Europeans. The Sybils are echoes from an older religion, ancient myths, be them called Pyrgian, Pelasgian, or, as I prefer, cyclopean. There you have it. Although past future telling is often twisted to make the people of old seem brutish and ignorant, Sybils are echoes from the pre-Greek times, just like the Cyclops, signs coming in from deeper in the Bronze Age, or even before that. Now that we've reached the future, the identity and warnings made by the Sybils are forever lost. due to the scholarly need to make ancient peoples look stupid. On the other hand, cyclopean walls are real, and it's not a coincidence that cyclopean walls are to be found in the places that are the most credible sites for having a Sybil. Cyclopean walls are physical remains from that same distant past, from the Bronze Age or before, from a culture that is being forgotten or mistreated by the same types that messed up the past of the Sybils. That's it for today. For the future, there is a prophecy saying that you will leave a like in this video. I'll be back for more. See you around.